Redditors who realize their spouse is a completely different person after marriage. Were there any red flags that you ignored while dating? If so, what were they? Yeah, she was really worried about some of my female friends stealing me away from her, to the point of not allowing me to interact with them. It's not that I don't trust you, it's that I don't trust her. Yeah, she cheated on me. That's why she didn't trust her. The biggest red flag was immediately after I proposed. She said, "Are you sure? Because I'm freaking crazy," then laughed. There is truth behind most humor. Later she was diagnosed with PTSD from a physically and mentally abusive relationship that she got into shortly after her father died relatively young and unexpectedly. She has extensive professional experience caring for people with severe mental disorders, and in retrospect I felt like she knew how to mask her symptoms well. For example, she let on that she was capable of setting healthy boundaries for herself, and that she was emotionally strong and independent. I am attracted to both of those traits, but the opposite is true. While she isn't crazy, what does it really mean in any sort of constructive sense anyway? She must or minimize a lot of issues she deals with at first, became dependent, and then physically aggressive and emotionally abusive towards me, after she physically restrained me and wouldn't let me leave a room until she was done screaming at me. I told her physical aggression was a deal breaker, and said if she gets physical again it's over. She told me she would get physically aggressive again. She sounded almost proud of it actually. She did. I stayed true to my word. The divorce should be finalized next month. I really appreciate how you didn't demonize this woman. Your post is full of compassion and honesty. Hard things to present while separating. Sorry you had to go through this. Several lies were told at the beginning, but there was always an explanation and a story for it. Previous divorce but didn't spend much time with their kids. Caught several times still on dating apps but said they were just friends to keep in touch with. Never admitted to any faults of their own, and all of the previous failed relationships were always the other person's fault. Couldn't keep the same group of friends. Very charismatic but couldn't keep a story straight. She didn't finish high school. After we got married I found out that she couldn't see anything moderately difficult through to the end, including our marriage. She ghosted me while I was at work 3 years 3 months 1 week and 3 days in. I haven't seen her since. Same as others. Immediate family relationships were overlooked, ignored. Her parents were gigantic enablers. Her parents didn't believe in counseling. Since her father was a drug rep, there was a pill for everything. As soon as we had our first kid, stress and anxiety showed its face. She turned to Xanax and Ambien. She never learned any coping skills. I was 29 when we divorced. A drug rep who doesn't believe in therapy is the worst kind. I'm sorry you went through that. I had an opposite experience. She showed green flags after marriage. Prior to marriage she was very meek with anyone other than me. Her parents were very strict, so even as an adult she was too afraid to tell them we were even engaged. What they said went even though we were living together as roommates. More than once she called their house to let them know she was going out, as if she wasn't allowed to otherwise. There were issues with a few friends that clashed with me. They were pretty toxic and I don't placate that type of behavior, so I'm not always well received. Doesn't bother me. And I saw her comforting people who were treating her poorly after we clashed over it more than once. She's a bleeding heart and couldn't stand to see people upset, even when the upset was caused by their own misdeeds. I felt like she didn't always have my back, but I never thought it was something I needed, and I would always have hers. She let people walk all over her while I'm the first person to put my foot down. In that aspect we were the most different. Before marriage she also had a huge amount of medical issues, and I was more than willing to accept a life of working to keep her alive and supporting her as a stay-at-home wife when she got too sick. Then we got married, and she changed. I think she finally saw us as a package deal. While my girlfriend was meek and weak, my wife became outspoken, not only socially but politically. She started calling me on my crap, something I appreciate greatly. I like learning about things I can work on, but would absolutely slay people who weren't treating us well. We ended a lot of friendships that weren't healthy and were stringing along because of her bleeding heart after the wedding. It was like she was a phoenix rising from the ashes of crap friends. She is still medically frail, but I think she sees a future to fight for now. The fact that I make more than her isn't just a fact now, it's a challenge. She wants to be the breadwinner so that I can quit my job and go back to my career in art. I did great, but the market was so unpredictable I needed to leave my dream for stability. She is still beautiful, caring, and gentle, but since being married, that caring aspect includes caring for herself. She doesn't let anyone dictate her life, especially her parents, and because of that she has healthier relationships with everyone, including me. I would also like to state that once she knew she locked me down, she opened her own kink floodgates and sex has never been the same. We do things to each other that most churches won't even preach against in sermons because they are ashamed to discuss the acts. That ring and those vows somehow told her she was worthy of self-respect and self-expression. I love her. It was like she was a phoenix rising from the ashes of crap friends. I realized it was a possibility since I met her, but I don't care because I love her. She's extremely emotionally unstable and the recent death of her brother spiraled her into a dark place. From there she was diagnosed with bipolar and now a lot of things from the past make sense. She is compliant with her meds and attends therapy. We are best friends so we communicate well. I love her very much and I'm here to support her no matter what, even though she's an extremely different person now. I'm sure I'm different too, but hopefully in a way that is beneficial to her. It was a hard lesson for me to learn that love cannot cure someone's depression, and I'm still learning how to cope with this huge change myself. People who are married to someone living with mental illness and struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes your reality gets so skewed living with your partner's illness every day, you forget some things are not normal or typical behavior for people who do not have depression or that particular illness. My fear was that her irrational behavior would become normal for me and I wouldn't see the warning signs if she was starting to struggle again. My own therapy sessions keep me in check. Thanks for letting me vent through it. I understand that one. Helping someone who is always depressed made me depressed. It becomes a chore and a duty. That feeling in your gut, like a silent tug that something isn't right, but you ignore it because you so desperately want someone to love you and be in love. Well, that feeling will eat away at you until it becomes too big to ignore, and the only choice left is to see how things really are, not how you want them to be. Don't ignore your gut. When I met my husband, he was a bit of a neat freak, and that didn't bother me, but I later found out that it was because his first wife was verbally abusive. In my opinion, she'd make him feel worthless, call him stupid, ugly, etc. I guess he tried to please her by always having things just right. She ended up cheating and leaving. He and I met shortly thereafter. Well, I went the opposite direction. Told him he's perfect, just be yourself and don't worry about being a neat freak, etc. He's still my perfect guy almost 20 years later, but he doesn't clean a dang thing anymore and I almost regret talking him out of that behavior because it clearly wasn't his natural tendency to be neat. All's well that ends well. Happy story in a depressing thread. Thanks for this. Telling her girlfriends personal things about you. I don't mean the size of your insert whatever here, but the things you confided in her about, like the abuse you suffered as a child or that you pick at your face. Always comparing you to her successful friends or family members. Questioning every decision you make, every single one. Shooting down every suggestion or decision, until one of her friends or family makes the same exact suggestion or decision. We met when I was 16 and he was 25. We lived together a number of years before we got married. We went together really well and I thought it was a good match. Almost the day after we were married, his family decided to set rules. He bought the house that we all lived in. It was large enough and we had the basement suite. We weren't allowed out after a certain time. His mother and father could berate me as much as they pleased. He himself became very controlling. I wasn't allowed to finish school or work and he would use these to mock and gild me after saying I was a burden and a leech, a gold digger. They all decided for me that I would have his children and we would all stay in the house together. Soon after I was taken off birth control, I was no longer allowed out of the house without an escort. I wasn't allowed to see my mother more than once a week. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple. I was isolated and after my mom moved away I had no one to turn to. He gained a lot of weight and started to tell me how fat and unattractive I was. He started looking at a lot of escort ads for Asian women. He brought over friends for me, 16-year-old girls. He met on MySpace and then would drool over them. I never had his baby. We were married when I was 19 and I was gone by 25. I ran away in the middle of the night. I never tried to get alimony or spousal support. I left all of my belongings behind. He still has made the process of divorce difficult and I am almost 31 now. It's finally going through. He still lives in the basement. I had no freaking idea what I was walking into and I lived with them all for years before the controls started. It was unbelievable how fast they changed. I'm the kid of two fairly narcissistic people. The red flags I've learned to avoid from growing up in my house were blaming trivial things on each other, a need to physically attack or break something when angry, attention-seeking behavior, seen my father throw himself downstairs or start chugging liquor just to get a reaction from my mom, especially if it's a "I'm totally going to kill myself unless you intervene" moment. Selfishness, like going out for food and never asking or offering anything to anyone else. Drug abuse, not regular drug use, but using drugs to cope with emotions that should normally be confronted. I'm mad or I can't deal with the situation so I need to drink, smoke, etc. Hiding money. On the flip side, needing to hide money because one person spends all of it leaving you high and dry come time to pay bills. Prioritizing one's happiness over everyone else's. For example, planning every vacation around one person's likes and dislikes. This is a huge red flag. Total inability to take responsibility for anything. Literally everything bad is someone else's fault. Inversely, taking credit for anything positive. Vindictive behavior. Can't count how many times I've seen my father break my mother's crap because he knew it would hurt her. Saying things you don't mean with the specific intent of upsetting someone. Treating others like their only purpose is to entertain you. I basically grew up in a red flag factory. The biggest one for me was finding a condom wrapper in the trash when I picked up a shampoo bottle for redding material while taking a dump. It was only my fiancée and I living there and we didn't use condoms. I was heartbroken, and when I confronted her later that day she told me that she found one while cleaning our adult drawer and wondered if she could put her foot in it. At the time it seemed to be a perfectly reasonable explanation. Or I was just so afraid of the truth and heartbreak that I desperately wanted to believe something that wouldn't be painful. We married a year later, and after 5 months of marriage I caught her in a web of lies that led to a co-worker's house. Even after getting upset with her and telling her it was over, I had a change of heart and asked her to see a marriage counselor with me. She refused and left me for my co-worker. Sometimes the refusal of counseling is better than wasting your time. The pictures. We had to take a million freaking pictures of us doing stuff. Any stuff. Everything was on social media with a picture. Every post was my Marine. Every conversation was about her being a Marine girlfriend, etc. It was all for show. I was a trophy. When we got married she quit going to school and quit her well-paying job. When she'd meet people and they asked what she did, she said she was a military wife, etc. We divorced and she has a kid now and everything is about being a mom. She just changed situations as far as I can tell. She went full depender. Back when I was married and he was in the Marines, nothing enraged me more than the military wife. Toughest job in the Corps. No B. It's not. Not by a long shot. This was the case with my parents. My mother didn't discover my father's mental problems until later. The why is that they got married way too fast. 2 months. And bipolar disorders have natural ups and downs. She had only seen the up. Textbook example of why you shouldn't marry unless you've been with the person for a while. Oh dang. As a friend of a bipolar person, the ups are exhilarating. He turns into a really outgoing friend and it's great. But you've also gotta be there for the downs. 'Cause that's what friends do. Hope you're doing okay. My ex, when we first started going out, would have a little too much to drink every few months. She would say each time, as I was holding her over the toilet, "Never again." Well, about 10 years later it was still happening. She ended up meeting some girlfriends that were all of the same well-lubricated frame of mind. Things got very messy after that and I felt that I was no longer an equal partner, but a babysitter. When that happens, there really is no way of coming back. My ex was like this, would always get way too drunk. She'd get angry with me while drunk and 90% of the time it'd end in her crying while I'm trying to console her. She made friends who all they'd do was go out and get drunk. Ended up almost every time her hating the night. He didn't necessarily change, but I woke up to an issue. His mother is overly involved. She wants to come stay weekends with us without warning. When he told her he had proposed, she told him he should have waited. She was bitchy at our wedding. And when we told her I was pregnant, she also said we should have waited. So, basically she has a negative opinion on us. He is a mama's boy too, so I bet it hurts. But he won't admit. I just wish she'd butt out. Yes, I ignored some pretty big red flags, and to this day I am not sure why I went ahead with the marriage. The first that I thought of was ignoring the fact that he was texting this one girl and lying about it. The texts didn't seem too crazy at first, but he would still lie and say things like I wasn't texting her or I just had a question about work. Then I also ignored when leading up to the wedding and him leaving for boot camp. He seemed to just not care anymore. He was already starting to get too big of a head because he had lost so much weight. Then on our wedding day he ignored me pretty much the entire reception. His excuse was I want to hang out with my friends because I am leaving for boot camp in 3 days. I should have just annulled the marriage right there, but I stuck around for another year and a half and it only got worse. Found girls' clothes in our room after visiting my family in our home state and then coming back to our apt. He would tell me my opinions didn't matter because I was nothing but a civilian. Ended after a year and a half of marriage. He still tells people I left him because he was deploying and I didn't want to wait for him. 6 years later and I am much happier than I was then. Your opinion does not matter to me, civilian. Please step away. She cheated to be with me. No one ever listens, do they? People need to make their mistakes, it seems. As it begins, so it ends. Always. Not me, but my mum. Dad was a perfect gentleman. Then came the wedding night. He had had a lot to drink and mum was just trying to put him to bed and he says to her, "Shut up B. I own you now." I would have left there and then. Got an annulment. Mum stayed and 2 years later had my brother. 2 years after that she had me. 5 years later and after a lot of emotional and physical abuse. Staying for the kids. My brother says to her, "Do we have to live with dad?" He scares me. We packed up everything the next day while he was at work and left. She's now been happily married to my stepdad for the last 10 plus years while my dad is a lonely pathetic living by himself in a crappy block of granny flats who hasn't seen either of his kids in 15 plus years. Bro, your brother might have saved all of your lives by asking that. I'm glad you all got out of that situation. I doubt this will reach many people, but it may help someone. I wasn't married, but my now ex and I dated for 6 years. I thought I would get past her being a mean person. She said that her past boyfriend had a large impact on her and that she was mean to people now because of it. She had a malicious mindset where if someone hurt her it was her job to hurt them back, which was me more often than not. If someone has a personality that you don't like, get out. They won't change. That's who they are. It will only get worse, and you will be miserable. Edit. I want to reinforce that they won't change. I'm serious. There's no maybe they will, maybe they won't. That person will not change. Habits, you can work through those. That's a lot to put on yourself to take that on, but it can happen if they want to. But personality? No. That's going to be them until the day you die. Dealing with this right now. Red flags are something you don't pay attention to until it's too late. My ex-husband had all the red flags of a sociopath. He would test to see how far he could go with making things up, and he learned what he could do to cover them up. He would use flowers or spend money on me to hide things he was doing. I learned what I was and wasn't allowed to say in public. Example, none of his friends knew he had a 12-year-old child. I spent little time with friends and family because he would convince me that they weren't supportive or make up things that I would believe because I trusted him. I left my career because he convinced me his pursuit was more important. Lots of things happened over the 10 years we were together. Most of them now I know were just lies to get him to where he wanted to be in life. In the end, he had a 6-month affair, and the flags were all there. But after years of being manipulated, I didn't know what to believe. He managed to date her and then moved to be with her on my dime by convincing me it had to do with his job. I even paid his rent for the first couple of months in hope he would come back. He manipulated everyone around him, including his friends and even his boss. Now he is a person I don't even recognize because he's taken on the personality of his girlfriend. I feel bad for her because the same thing is happening to her, but in a way I feel like she deserves it. If you're looking for an outline of what to look for, I would say 1. Have you given up something you love for that person? 2. Do gifts tend to arrive after something you weren't quite sure was the truth? 3. Do you feel like you're begging the person to stay with you all the time? 4. Do you find yourself above and beyond to please someone just for their affection? Relationships should be relatively easy. Sure, there will be fights and times where you aren't sure, but if you're giving up your values or your personality, it's time to go. Strangely enough, no, I've spent years racking my brain, but nothing, no clue at all, while dating. He was sex positive and had no issue with the number of sex partners I had had. He also knew that I had been in an abusive relationship and told me so many times how nothing a woman could do could justify hitting her. He was so warm and gentle and kind. Then we got married, and suddenly I was a W who didn't respect herself, had more sausage in me than a fat man at an all-you-can-eat buffet, and I was cheating on him with a married co-worker that I had met 2 weeks before. I was weak for letting my ex beat me up, and I was stupid for not leaving the first time it happened. He shouted at me for over an hour while I was stuck in the car with him that I deserved it for staying. It was my fault. I stayed married to him. God help me, but I never really trusted him again, nor did I ever open up to him about anything really personal. Turns out he was a closet misogynist. Never saw it coming. One of the most underrated predictors of spousal behavior is the parents. When we become husband or wife, we emulate our examples of what a husband or wife is. I was surprised when I started instinctually doing all the things my dad used to. My wife started doing all the things that drove me nuts about my mother-in-law. I found that things got better when I started acting like my father-in-law. It's weird, but it's just how things work. You have no idea how much I think this may help me. Thank you for sharing. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.